The storm had been raging for hours over the roads of Normandy. The year was 1944, and the American supply lines, those endless arteries of the Allied invasion, were fighting a battle of their own. The rain fell in heavy diagonal sheets, drumming against the steel bodies of idling trucks. Their headlights carved dim tunnels through the fog. Somewhere beyond the wrecked hedgerows, the front line needed food, fuel, and ammunition. Yet here, along this forgotten stretch of mud and gravel, one convoy stood still. Inside a makeshift roadside post, built from scavenged planks and tarps, a young mechanic named Private Joseph Joe Tilden crouched over a tire, his hands black with grease and rainwater. His breath came out in short white bursts as he rolled the heavy wheel toward the next axle. Each thud of rubber against mud sounded absurdly loud against the howling wind. He was rotating tires, not repairing them, switching front to back, left to right, even across vehicles. It was an act no one had ordered, and few understood. A lieutenant stepped into the light, his coat dripping. "What on earth are you doing, soldier?" he barked. Tilden didn't look up. "Trying to make them last a few hundred miles more, sir?" The officer stared. "You're wasting time. Those tires are finished." But Joe only nodded slightly, the way men nod when they've already heard the same thing too many times. The lieutenant shook his head, muttering, "Crazy farmhand," before walking away toward the radio tent. The other mechanics snickered quietly. The war had no shortage of men like Joe, tinkerers, amateurs, dreamers who thought they could outsmart entropy. Yet outside, the rain did not stop, and neither did Joe. He had grown up fixing plows and tractors on a Missouri farm where tires were too precious to throw away. His father used to say, "A smart man doesn't buy more rubber, he buys more time." And in this war, time was a currency rarer than gold. One by one, he marked each wheel with chalk, recording its mileage and wear. In his soggy notebook, he wrote, "Rotation schedule every 500 kilometers. Even wear, longer life." It sounded ridiculous even to him, but he kept writing. Somewhere behind him, engines roared back to life. The convoy began to move again, splashing through the dark toward the front. A few days later, when the same trucks returned for service, their tires, patched, rotated, balanced, were still intact. Not one blowout. Not one breakdown in the kill zones of the French countryside. The men noticed. The laughter faded. Word began to spread from campfire to campfire about the mechanic who refused to give up on worn-out rubber. That night, Joe sat beside a flickering lamp, cleaning his tools. He could still hear the rain outside, mingled with the distant thunder of artillery. Somewhere between those sounds lay the truth he couldn't yet prove, that sometimes the craziest ideas are the only ones that keep the wheels of war turning. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And before we roll further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. The camera opens on an empty rubber factory in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 1942. Conveyor belts hang still, dust collecting where once molten latex flowed. A single fluorescent lamp flickers above stacks of unused molds. The narrator's voice enters, steady and low, cutting through the silence like a memory returning from the front. When Japan seized Southeast Asia, the world lost 90% of its natural rubber overnight. That line isn't hyperbole, it's arithmetic. Before the war, plantations in Malaya and the Dutch East Indies supplied nearly all Allied needs. When those fell, the United States suddenly found itself running a mechanized war with no tires to spare. Each B-24 bomber required 22 tires for production and training rotations. Each tank used 6. Every convoy truck needed 4, plus a spare. The numbers were brutal. Archival footage flashes across the screen. Factories running day and night, chemical engineers in white coats mixing experimental synthetics, workers pouring coffee beside vats of boiling latex substitutes. It was an age where rubber became as strategic as oil, steel, or ammunition. Soldiers joked bitterly that a flat tire could cost a battle. It wasn't a joke for long. In Europe, supply convoys were rolling on patched treads, reinforced with strips of salvaged rubber and cut canvas. Some tires were filled with sawdust, others layered with old boot soles. Drivers carried shovels, not just for mud, but to dig out entire wheels when the rubber shredded. 1 inch of rubber equals 1 mile of survival. the Quartermaster Bulletin wrote in early 1943. And that mile could mean the difference between life and death for a stranded driver under sniper fire. To save material, the U.S. War Production Board introduced strict rationing. Civilian tires were outlawed. Families drove on bald ones until they peeled like paper. The government offered rewards for every discarded inner tube turned in. Even chewing gum manufacturers announced reduced output to spare latex for the front. Rubber, once trivial, invisible, had become wartime gold. And inside that desperate landscape, the smallest mechanical idea could become a matter of national strategy. When Joe Tilden proposed rotating tires to distribute wear evenly, his superiors didn't laugh out of cruelty. They laughed because no one believed a single mechanic's method could shift logistics on a continental scale. But war doesn't ask where genius comes from. It only asks if it works. On a distant front, a sergeant wrote home to his wife, "We patch them till the air shows through. You can hear the rubber scream when it hits a rock. They say some fella back home's got an idea to make 'em last. I sure hope he's right." That letter would never reach Joe, yet it marked the beginning of a silent revolution. One not made of weapons, but of understanding the physics of endurance. Because when rubber turned to gold, every rotation, every patch, every turn of a wrench became a prayer whispered between man and machine. The morning mist over Normandy, August 1944, clung to the mud roads like smoke. Dozens of olive-drab trucks from the Red Ball Express roared toward the front, each carrying gasoline, rations, and ammunition for Patton's Third Army. Their mission was simple: keep the tanks fed. Their nightmare was constant: ambushes, mud, and tires that died faster than soldiers could replace them. Private Joe Tilden rode in the back of a maintenance truck, notebook on his lap. His fingers traced lines of wear he had recorded from previous runs. The pattern was clear. The front tires always died first, the inner rears next, and the spares almost never used. Uneven stress distribution, he muttered, recalling lessons from his farm days when his father had rotated the wagon wheels before harvest season. If it worked for a plow, maybe it could work for war. So he began his experiment. After every 500 kilometers, his crew would stop and rotate every tire, front to rear, inner to outer, left to right. They used chalk marks and hand-painted codes. It looked ridiculous. Soldiers crouching in the rain, counting revolutions like clockmakers. Other drivers called them the tire circus. But within weeks, their convoy outlasted every other line. Archival records from the Transportation Corps later confirmed it. The trucks under Tilden's maintenance logged twice the average mileage, with fewer than half the blowouts reported on comparable routes. Mechanics who had mocked him began copying his charts. Commanders noticed the change in efficiency. Fuel deliveries arriving early, supply losses dropping by 38%. What no report could measure was morale. Drivers no longer dreaded every stretch of gravel. They started humming tunes as they drove through the night, trusting their wheels. "She holds," one soldier said, patting his tire as if it were alive. But the rotation rule wasn't just about saving rubber, it saved lives. The Red Ball Express operated under blackout conditions. A single stalled truck could expose the entire convoy to enemy fire. When tires held, men survived. Less downtime meant fewer ambushes, fewer graves by the roadside. A driver named Corporal Henry Davis later recalled in a field letter, "I thought it was nonsense, but my truck hasn't blown a wheel since we did that crazy swap. Maybe the man's not crazy. Maybe he's blessed." Underneath the roar of engines and rain, Tilden's method became gospel. A sergeant began calling it the crazy rotation, and the name stuck. Soon, even officers were scribbling it into maintenance logs. No medals were handed out, no ceremony held, just miles saved, lives continued, and the quiet satisfaction of something that worked. That night, as convoys snaked across the French countryside, headlights flickering under low clouds, the wheels turned like clockwork. Each revolution a heartbeat in the arteries of war. And somewhere among those trucks, a young mechanic finally allowed himself to smile at the rhythm of survival he had created. Dawn broke over a depot outside Chartres, its yard full of trucks lined like sleeping elephants. Engineers from the Quartermaster Corps gathered clipboards and rulers, preparing for what they called the rotation trial. The idea had spread across France, whispered through convoy networks. Try the crazy farmhands pattern. It doubles your distance. Two groups were set up, One followed standard army procedure, replacing tires only when they failed. The other followed Tilden's rotation schedule, swapping every 500 kilometers. The test lasted a month. The data, when tallied, stunned even the skeptics. Out of 112 trucks, the conventional group lost 34 to blowouts. The rotation group lost only 8. Fuel efficiency increased by 41%, tire lifespan by 87%. For the first time, convoys were outpacing the supply of tires rather than begging for them. The final report bore a dry military tone, but a line that history would remember. Private J.R. Tilden's maintenance procedure results in sustained operational range exceeding projections. Recommends standardization. A lieutenant colonel named Walter Kessler, head of logistics evaluation, underlined a single note in his margin. He's not crazy. He's efficient. Within weeks, mimeographed copies of Tilden's method circulated through depots from Cherbourg to Antwerp. Some officers tried to claim it as their own discovery. Others dismissed it as a temporary trick, but the numbers kept proving otherwise. War, indifferent to pride, listened only to arithmetic. In a mess tent one night, an argument broke out. A driver slammed his cup down, saying, "You call it luck? That crazy Missouri boy saved my route. I'd drive through hell on his tires." His sergeant laughed. "Fine, but don't tell headquarters. They'll make us rotate the general's Jeep next." The men chuckled, but beneath the humor lay awe. Statistics don't lie, and by fall of 1944, the Red Ball Express had transported over 412,000 tons of supplies in less than 3 months, the majority arriving on trucks running Tilden's rotation system. A field photograph taken by a Signal Corps photographer captured the scene. Joe, sleeves rolled up, chalking arrows on a tire while smoke from a distant village drifted behind him. No caption mentioned his name. No headline marked the change. But somewhere deep in the archives, the proof endured. A quiet revolution written not in medals or speeches, but in the clean lines of a performance chart. In war, results are the only proof of genius. The Red Ball Express was more than a convoy. It was a lifeline. By the autumn of 1944, its drivers, most of them African American, had become the pulse of the Allied advance. They drove through the night with headlights off, along roads cratered by bombs and littered with burnt-out vehicles. They knew one truth above all: if a truck stopped, men died. Corporal Henry Davis, 22, from Georgia, leaned against his steering wheel one night, listening to the rain slide down the windshield. The convoy had just rolled past the smoking ruins of a French village. He wrote later in his notebook, "A tougher tire means I get to live another night. That's all that matters." That line, short and raw, captured the essence of Joe Tilden's miracle. His rotation method didn't make men heroes. It gave them another sunrise. In the weeks since the system became standard, breakdowns along the 700-mile supply chain had fallen dramatically. Convoys now moved like clockwork, carrying up to 12,000 tons of fuel and ammunition daily, each mile another step toward liberation. The soldiers called it the rhythm, the hum of engines, the steady drone of rubber against asphalt, the synchronized turn of thousands of tires spinning together. Even under blackout orders, the sound was hypnotic. The convoy commanders joked that they could navigate by rhythm alone. But the rhythm could be broken by a single tire bursting at the wrong moment. The men never forgot that sound, the violent crack in the dark, followed by shouts, smoke, and chaos. Every explosion on the road felt personal, like a heartbeat stopping mid-beat. That fear had once haunted every night. Now it began to fade. And so the human element emerged, the bond between machine and man. Drivers gave their trucks names: Bessie, Iron Lady, Baby Ruth. They blessed each rotation like a ritual, tracing chalk marks on the sidewalls before dawn. "Every spin keeps us breathing," Davis told a new recruit. "Don't ever take it for granted." Sometimes they found German POWs along the roadside, watching silently as the convoys thundered past. One captured mechanic reportedly said, "Even your tires march in formation." That statement reached Joe months later. He smiled quietly when he read it in a report. The enemy had understood what his own officers once mocked. Because war, at its core, isn't only about battles and maps, it's about motion. The ability to keep moving when others can't. The screen fades to the image of an endless night highway, a line of dim headlights curving into darkness. The sound of the tires becomes softer, almost like breathing. And to you watching now, have you ever realized how much of survival depends not on strength, but on small, patient adjustments? What's one rotation in your own life that kept you moving when everything else was falling apart? By early 1945, the story of the crazy rotation had crossed oceans. In London headquarters, General Breckin Somervell, the man who oversaw the entire U.S. Army Service Forces, received a quarterly report from the European Theater of Operations. The figures spoke louder than any speech could. Over 15 million gallons of fuel saved, tire consumption reduced by nearly half, convoy range doubled without additional resources. In neat typewritten text, a quiet line appeared near the bottom. Improved tire rotation schedule standardized across all logistics units per field recommendation by Private J.R. Tilden. Joe Tilden never saw the full report. He was still in France, knee-deep in grease and paperwork, filling out requisition forms under a leaky roof. The war was nearly over, and the headlines belonged to generals, not mechanics. Yet, inside every depot, motor pool, and garage, his method had become gospel. Even the German prisoners of war assigned to repair captured trucks followed the rotation chart religiously. One POW, a former Opel engineer named Carl Brenner, scribbled in his diary, "Even American dirt obeys efficiency. Their madness is organized." That note was later found in his belongings when he was repatriated, a strange tribute from one technician to another. Meanwhile, in the American ranks, the method became an unofficial badge of pride. Crews who used it painted tiny white arrows on their fenders, a secret symbol of belonging to Tilden's circle. When convoys met on the road, they'd honk twice, salute once, and keep rolling. The Army never sanctioned it, but it spread faster than any order from above. At Fort Belvoir, training manuals were quietly updated. Chapter titles changed: Tire Management and Rotation Procedures, Standard Protocol, U.S. Army Transportation Corps, 1945. Engineers cited it as one of the simplest yet most effective innovations of the war. One evening, as the snow began to fall outside the depot, Joe received a brief telegram. Rotation procedure approved. Stop, Army doctrine. Stop, congratulations. Stop. No signature, no ceremony. He folded it once, tucked it into his wallet, and went back to work. Sometimes the greatest victories are nameless. Sometimes genius never wears the uniform of a hero. As the war neared its end, those tires kept rolling. Through Belgium, across the Rhine, into the heart of Germany. The wheels turned under tanks, ambulances, and mail trucks, carrying letters home. Every revolution whispered the same truth, that endurance is the quiet twin of courage. And to you watching, how many revolutions in history or in your own life went unnoticed but changed everything? How many unsung ideas carried the weight of entire nations without anyone ever remembering the name behind them? The war ended with the echo of engines finally quieting across Europe. The roads that had once thundered with convoys now lay still, scattered with the ghosts of tire tracks and forgotten supply depots. For Private Joseph R. Tilden, discharge papers came without ceremony, just another name typed among thousands. He packed his worn-out boots, his grease-stained notebook, and a single wrench he'd carried since Missouri. By spring of 1946, he was home again, standing before the old barn where his father once mended tractors. The fields were overgrown, the soil cracked, but the silence was familiar. He opened his notebook, the one filled with rotation patterns, mileage notes, and calculations scribbled in mud and pencil. In the margin of the last page, faded by rain, he'd written, "Keep them turning." He smiled at the simplicity of it. Back in the cities, tire rotation was no longer a secret. Civilian trucking companies adopted it within months, hailing it as the efficiency rule from the front. Gasoline haulers, postal fleets, even Greyhound buses began teaching the same pattern that once made soldiers laugh. Maintenance schools called it the Tilden method, though few remembered who Tilden was. In 1952, an automotive magazine published a short article titled "How Wartime Mechanics Changed Modern Driving." It mentioned, almost in passing, a nameless Army engineer whose tire rotation technique doubled service life. Joe read it while waiting for his lunch at a roadside diner in Springfield. He folded the page carefully, placed it in his jacket pocket, and said nothing. Recognition was never what he had wanted. He later opened a small repair shop near Route 66, one of countless roadside garages serving the boom of post-war America. On quiet evenings, he would take a Jeep wheel from the scrap pile and spin it slowly, watching the rubber blur into a single moving circle. He would tell his apprentices, "Nothing lasts forever, but if you learn to rotate it right, it'll go farther than you think." They nodded, never realizing they were hearing a line born from war. The years rolled on, and the memory of convoys, mud, and chalked arrows faded into history. But every time a mechanic somewhere jacked up a car and moved a front tire to the rear, they unknowingly saluted that lone soldier who had once refused to stop thinking in the rain. As the screen fades to dusk, an old man's hands, calloused, trembling, turn a Jeep wheel one last time. The metallic hum melts into the soft thump of a human heartbeat. His voice, faint but certain, whispers, "Nothing lasts forever, but if you know how to rotate it, it'll go farther." The wheel slows, the light dims, and the story of one forgotten mechanic merges with the rhythm of every road that followed. When the war machines went silent, the world rediscovered the beauty of stillness. Yet somewhere beneath that quiet, the same invisible rhythm continued. The rotation of wheels, the hum of progress, the endurance of ideas born from necessity. The story of Joseph R. Tilden was never about glory, it was about motion. The stubborn refusal to let anything or anyone stop turning when it mattered most. In the official records, he remained a line item, a maintenance clerk with notable field efficiency. There were no medals, no parades, no photographs in history books. But history, as it turns out, doesn't always reward the loudest deeds. Sometimes it hides its greatest transformations inside the smallest revolutions. A bolt tightened, a tire swapped, a pattern sketched in the mud. The crazy rotation was more than a maintenance trick, it was a philosophy. It whispered that progress comes not from strength or genius alone, but from persistence, from the willingness to turn something ordinary into something lasting. Because every wheel, like every life, wears down. The secret is not to stop. The secret is to rotate, to shift, to redistribute the burden before it breaks you. In post-war America, millions of vehicles would cross deserts, mountains, and frozen highways on principles born in Tilden's muddy depot. Truckers would talk about tread wear, engineers about balance, but none would imagine that the origin of their wisdom lay in one sleepless night in Normandy, when a young mechanic defied the rain and the laughter around him. The camera drifts now over empty highways at dawn. Tires whisper against the asphalt, a sound almost like breathing. Somewhere, across generations, the lesson still turns, that even the smallest idea, if kept in motion, can carry the weight of a world. And if you've come this far, think of your own roads, the worn paths you travel every day. Which of them could go twice as far? If only you found the courage to rotate, to begin again, to keep turning.